I grew up on a farm, and early on it was kind of a marginal farm, if you will. You know, this is Depression era, and my dad had been a supervisor in the CCCs. He'd done some forestry classes up at Michigan State, the agricultural college at that time, but because of the Depression, he never actually got his degree in forestry, but he had some forestry. But he had grown up on a farm in the mountains in West Virginia, and my mother had grown up on a farm here in southern Michigan. And so that was one thing that they both were familiar with, you know. And so they bought the farm that they could afford, which did have electricity, but no indoor plumbing. and so my first years there were, you know, on the farm. This farm, the people that lived there had planted fruit trees, and so there were a variety of fruit trees. And I remember the plums and the apples and cherries, you know, peach trees, and I used to climb up in the fruit trees. I think that was one of my early contacts with trees, where I was really pretty aware of them. You know, I was kind of interested. I didn't know anything about trees except that they were fun to climb, and you know that there were some that produced fruit. And then during the war years, World War II, they had a chance to. They needed a bigger farm. See, this was 40 acres, so they found up here in southern Michigan, near where my mother grew up, a bigger farm that was available, 80 acres of land, and had a river running through it. Incidentally, that painting right there was something that an artist did for my mom from a photo that a friend had taken of the bridge over the river on our farm. I used to wade in there and catch crayfish and
amazing.
And so that I grew up with that kind of thing, and I enjoyed just, you know, walking along the river, wandering, and then going out. And there was a woodlot on the farm, you know, where we had the spring flowers. So that was, and I knew beech trees because the bark was so different, and I knew that the one really odd one there was a sycamore, you know, and that the willows that we used the switches from for fishing poles, that those were willows, but it didn't really, you know, not much beyond that. And then eventually, of course, I went up to Michigan State and as a biology student. I thought my main thing, you know, my mother had been a teacher, you know, starting out in a one-room country school, and ultimately went in the big city of Hillsdale teaching. And then, and of course, my brother and I had been in the one-room country school too, and so I was, as an 8th grader, I went from one-room country school to school where they actually changed classes. And all that went along with that. That was part of the package. If my mom taught there, that she could bring us in without, you know, paying extra tuition, you know,
nice.
To go to the big school. And so I was going to be a teacher. I got a teaching certificate. You know, I did that for a while, and where I was teaching, you know, a lot of the sort of mentality was, how many days till Friday? And I really enjoyed teaching, but I didn't enjoy the discipline part of it, and the challenges that these young people are always testing you, trying to see what they can get away with, and so I went different direction, you know. Ultimately, went back to Michigan State. I had been working in a nursery landscaping place, and I thought, well, you know, I need to do, where am I going to go from here? Maybe I could be a landscape architect. And so went over to the university and talked with the people in landscape architecture, and they gave me some tests. I don't think they were overwhelmed, you know, what happened. And they said, well, you could probably do this. And so it's going to take 3 years, you know, to get a degree here now in landscape architecture. And then people at the nursery where I was working said, well, yeah, thought about, you know, going back in horticulture. You know, they have this landscape horticulture program at Michigan State. And with your background, your degree in biology, you know, it shouldn't be any problem for you to get in there. Well, they looked at my transcript and said, no problem. When do you want to start? And I could do that in less than 2 years, get a master's in ornamental horticulture. And so I decided that. And so I was realized I was pretty interested, of course, in learning more about trees and how they grow and all that, and particularly digging in the nursery. You know, there's a lot of this stuff going on below ground if you really knew how roots grow and what's necessary to make them grow. You'd have something important. And so my master's thesis, because the people I was working under, that was their interest in tying one man from soil physics and then the horticulture professor. So my master's thesis was moisture relationships in container-grown nursery stock.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
And, you know, so, and I had, I thought I was going to fail soil chemistry. I was sure. This is big embarrassment. And I said something to the grad student that was basically conducting the labs and all that. And is there any source, you know, where I could learn more about this? I'm really struggling. And he recommended a book on soil chemistry. I got the book, and I read, and that book made sense to me. And you know, just a different presentation. And I got an A in the course when I gave the test, because apparently a lot of other people were as confused as I was. And so I came in confused at a higher level, if you will. And then, you know, we had courses in fertilizer and soil fertility, and had the soil physics course. I don't remember a lot of that, but I passed it with a B grade, I think. But I remember very clearly, you know, now, because it became apparent that I knew some stuff, but I really didn't know what was going on. And at one point, the professor said, "Now you all." He's kind of throwing this out. You all understand that drainage is a function of the length of the water column. Of course, I had no idea that. I wrote it down very carefully. And I didn't know what that meant until, you know, I had the degree and I'm out working in the for the Davy Tree Expert Company as their go-between between the scientific world and the people doing the tree work. In one of the trade magazines there was an article that mentioned that you could demonstrate this by taking a sponge and soaking it and repositioning it so you're changing the length of the water column. Oh, that was what that was about. Then I knew what they were talking about, And so I've always kind of fancied myself as a source of soil and root growth information. I've been trying to learn everything I can about it, and I've got piles of literature and technical reports, and I don't have all the answers, but I know what the questions are. I think pretty much, and it's clear that to me that some soil mixed ingredients are superior to others, but there's some that are quite inferior too. And so
now,
I've been interested in that, and you know that I've had articles published.
Now, at what point was it before or after you got your master's that you went to Japan?
So what happened was that when I was working on my bachelor's degree in biology, with the idea I was going to be a school teacher, that this is the time the Vietnam War was the Korean War was going on, and I would have been drafted. I'd been over there, part of that, but if my grades were good enough, I was deferred until I graduated. And that was the understanding with the draft board, basically, that when you graduated, well then, okay, now it's your turn. And so when I graduated, I knew they were coming after me, or at least I was pretty sure they were, and so I went down and signed up, and spent 2 years in the service. But after being sent to the counterintelligence school here in Baltimore, then well, I got to tell you this, Bruce. We at one point I was in this school. They passed around these sheets that said that you could choose whether you wanted to stay in the United States or go, whether you would like to go to. They had a whole list, Germany, France, England, and then one was Far East, and you got to make a choice and you sign it. Well, I didn't choose anything and I didn't sign it because I thought I hadn't seen enough of the United States. And you're not going to be surprised by this. Everybody in my training unit went to the Far East. I didn't want to go to Japan. I'd rather have gone to Texas or California. I thought that would be just good luck if I could do that well. So, okay, we're going to make the best of that. And ended up, well, I remember riding from the port in Yokohama across Tokyo on the back of this truck that picked us up after going over on the troop ship. And I'm looking out the back of this truck and thinking, what a fool I was. This is going to be the experience of a lifetime. One thing that really caught my attention right away was all these, we'd call them privacy fences now, but people in Japan, of course, in very limited space, many of them have fence screens that kind of separate their small space from the traffic. Often no sidewalk, right up to the street. And they weren't just pieces of plywood tacked up. Everything had a design, and not just casual design. They were quietly but attractively done. And so as it turned out, it was an experience, life-changing experience of a lifetime. In fact, I'd been there, I spent 17 months there, but that picture is the first, I took that the first time I saw bonsai in just a small exhibit. It must have been a neighborhood kind of thing, you know. It didn't, my memory is it wasn't the width of this room, and this was the most interesting part of it. But I looked at that, you know, that's really kind of interesting, you know, what they're doing. And then I realized almost immediately that I could never do that, because you'd have to be Japanese and heir to several generations of family secrets. There got to be secrets involved in this. And I could have gone to Omiya every weekend, you know, if I'd had a sense of the possibility. But I passed it by, and it wasn't until I got back here and had been doing the master's work at Michigan State and had a job in a nursery. It's kind of nursery. They called me the nursery manager. I was a working foreman, is what I was. Somebody had said, well, you know, there's an interesting garden center over in Grand Ledge. You might want to go see that sometime. And Janine and I went over there one Sunday afternoon, and here were these trees in pots, you know. So the man that had this little garden center in Grand Ledge was like Michigan's bonsai pioneer, you know. He had gone out to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and taken some classes there. And he had some of his work, and, you know, and I look back now, and it was basically, like everybody starts, kind of entry level. But I was really struck just, you know, somehow the quality, the beauty, really. I wouldn't have said it that way at the time, of a couple of compositions. One in particular was a little hemlock in a hexagonal pot with a stone and some moss, and so it was this composition. You know, I thought, yeah, that's really interesting. But the informative thing to me was this guy wasn't Japanese. Like the light turned on there, and, you know, I talked with him a little bit, and he showed me some of the few books in English, you know, at that time. And before I left that day, I thought, you know, I'd like to try to do that sometime. Just didn't have any sense of whether I could or not, but I wanted to try. And I remember very clearly that I'm about to leave, and he's telling me, well, most of the information is written down, you know. I said, well, Bob, isn't there some secret? And I don't know whether I was the first person that he told that to, but he said, well, you have to have a soil mix that really grows roots. That was his words. And I was like, I've been studying that. I don't, if that's what you got to do, I ought to be able to handle that. I didn't know whether I could, how I'd do with the design part of it, you know, the styling, but I ought to be able to come up with a soil mix that really grows roots. And so I spent a lifetime, and I still don't have one. I think my mix is better than most, but that was sort of the impetus there. And I'm just trying to think where I was going to go from that. So anyway, okay, I'm going to do this sometime if I get a chance. And then after working in the nursery there a while, I was fortunate enough to get a job with the Davy Tree Expert Company in their technical service department. So I was the person with the college education, you know, and was teaching in their winter foremanship school and some things. But, you know, I'm interested in the bonsai. Well, there was a book in the Davy Technical Service Group library that somebody had bought once because they're wondering whether the Davy Company should be interested in these little trees. And my boss was one of the vice president in charge of research and development for he bought this, and there it was on the shelf. And look at, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I've been there, I don't think it was more than 2 years, you know, and my boss says, I think it'd be good for you to get acquainted with what we're doing down south. And so there's this tree meeting down at Callaway Gardens, you know, it's sort of a regional convention kind of thing. I'll just send you down there. Well, one of the speakers at that meeting was kind of a throw-in, a man that was a newspaper man that was going to talk about interesting trees. Well, it turned out it's a man named George Hull, who had just written a book, Bonsai for Americans. And so he's talking about bonsai, and I still have the note somewhere that I made during that. And basically his story was that there weren't any big secrets, and his soil recommendation was you just dig up some subsoil clay and let it dry, and that worked pretty well. Well, I tried it, and it didn't work well at all. And the big difference I later understood was that southern clay really gets hard and kind of permanently hard when it dries, and the clay that I had up here in Michigan turns to mud every time you water it. So that's kind of the and so my first trees all experiments all died, you know, because I kept them in the garage over winter and without adequate protection. And okay, we've got to learn more about that. But then okay, we're going to try this again. So my advice to anybody getting into this, you know, if you really want to grow bonsai, don't give up too easily, you know. I've invented this statistic, but I think about 90% of people involved in bonsai today are people whose first tree died, you know, and they were the ones that persisted, came back and tried it again.
Yeah.
So the rest of it's kind of grown from there. You know, when I was fortunate enough again to get hired as the first education specialist at Hidden Lake Gardens. I had these entry-level bonsai that I was working on. You know, I'd gotten pretty excited about this. I'd learned about the Cleveland Bonsai Club, so that was my first involvement with other people that were interested in this and organized bonsai. And okay, now we're trying to sell a house in Kent, Ohio, and I'm staying with my parents here over near Hillsdale. And what do I do with these trees that I've accumulated? And so the conservatory complex was brand new, and of course that was part of what precipitated the hiring of an education specialist at Hidden Lake Gardens. You know, they're getting people that are coming, asking for information and tours and so on. So the service house there was relatively open at that time. How do you feel if I just kept some of my trees here? You know, I'll take care of them here and until we find a house. And I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And then when they saw what I had, they asked, how would you feel about having a few of these of your bonsai on display? Oh, sure. Absolutely. So that so the first bonsai were my trees that they were displaying, and that went on for some years, you know, that I was maintaining some of my trees there in their time,
Well, this seems like a perfect place to break and go to Hidden Lake Gardens.
That's works for me. Yeah.
All right, let's go.
You remember when this looked like the branching was all looked like a candelabra, and it wasn't very nice really. It was flowering attractively one spring, and so I took it up to the Bonsai Society meeting up in Ann Arbor, and you and Jerry and a couple others were saying, Jack, the flowers are nice, but the tree's ugly. And well, I've been waiting. It only grows out on the tips. I've been waiting for a break back inside, and it just never does that. It doesn't grow that way. And so I don't have many choices, do I? And you guys were saying, oh yes you do. Cut all the branches off and start over. And by the time I left that night with Betty Blake, who was riding up with me, I knew I was going to do that. And Betty said, Jack, do you think you could air layer that apple? I thought, well, I'm going to cut all the branches off. Why not give it a try? So one of those candelabra things, see the scar there? Right there. And another one out that way, and one back there. So those were the three main air layers I put on, and they did root, but they never really thrived. And so I don't have the remains of that, but today there's about 4 inches of branch back there that was left after we took the air layers off. The rest of those branches are all grown.
Amazing.
And since that time, and the really unexpected thing for me was it seemed very quick, like just within a week or two after the air layers were put on, that just below the air layer, here's a bud showed up where there had never been. I would have been never. And all of a sudden, here's this bud, and then it opens up, and I let it grow out about 3 feet, and just beneath this other air, in each case, we're seeing things where this had never happened, and I'm realizing that I've cut off the flow of carbohydrates and hormones and all that all coming down just beneath the bark, and so that allowed those buds or caused the buds, resulted in that to break and get a fresh start there. Bill Heston has a story about these farmers and a horse, when the horse was fairly sickly and so on, and farmers had rather than send it to the slaughterhouse or whatever, offered it for a very low price to his friend who bought it, and it began to get healthier again. And at first I bought it back, and so this kept going on for a while, and then at a point it got so nice that this horse, that somebody else offered one of these guys, the one that had it at the time, price that was even higher, than anything had sold for before. And so he sold it to the and the first guy that he was dealing with, what do you sell that horse for? You and I were making a good living on that horse.